The bitter wind carved through Olivia Greene's threadbare shawl like knives as she stood shivering on the auction platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that had already rubbed her skin raw and bleeding. February 1879 had brought the worst blizzard Arizona territory had seen in decades. An unnatural storm that had swept down from the mountains and trapped the small settlement of Gila Bend in a white nightmare. And now she found herself being sold like cattle to pay her dead stepfather's gambling debts to men whose eyes held nothing but cruelty and dark intentions. The saloon where this mockery of justice was taking place reeked of unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, and desperation. And Olivia kept her green eyes fixed on the warped floorboards, because looking at the leering faces in the crowd made her stomach turn with fear and disgust. $50, called out a voice thick with malice, and Olivia recognized it as belonging to Silas Crouch, a mine foreman known throughout the territory for working his men to death and treating women even worse. Her heart sank further into the pit of her chest. 60, countered another voice, this one belonging to Frank Pettigrew, a cattle rustler with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, and a reputation for violence that preceded him into every town he entered. The so-called auctioneer, a weaselly man named Morton who served as both the local banker and her stepfather's former card-playing companion, rubbed his hands together with barely concealed glee. $60 for this fine young woman, healthy and strong, good for cooking, cleaning, and whatever else a man might need. Olivia's face burned with humiliation despite the cold that had seeped into her bones. She was 22 years old, had been living a respectable life working at the general store until her stepfather, Walter Greene, had drunk himself into an early grave 3 weeks ago, leaving behind debts that somehow legally fell on her shoulders according to Morton's creative interpretation of territorial law. The real law, such as it was in this remote corner of Arizona, was 50 miles away in Yuma, and the current blizzard made travel impossible. She was trapped alone with no family to speak for her and no money to flee. 75, Silas called out, his tobacco-stained teeth visible through his grin. 80, Frank shot back, his hand resting on the knife at his belt in a clear warning. The crowd of perhaps 30 men pressed closer, their breath creating clouds of steam in the poorly heated saloon. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and snow continued to pile against the windows in drifts that reached halfway up the glass. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, cutting Gila Bend off from the rest of the world, and it showed no signs of stopping. Under normal circumstances, such an auction would never have been allowed to proceed, but these were not normal circumstances. The storm had brought out something savage in people, a reminder that civilization was just a thin veneer over the brutal realities of survival. $100, Silas announced, and the room fell momentarily quiet at the substantial sum. Frank's eyes narrowed to slits. $125. Olivia's breathing came in short gasps now. She had tried to run 2 days ago when Morton first informed her of his intentions, but the storm had driven her back within an hour, frostbite nipping at her fingers and toes. She had tried to appeal to the few decent people in town, but they were too frightened of Morton and his cronies to intervene. The circuit judge would not arrive for another 2 months at least, and by then it would be far too late. Whatever man bought her tonight would claim her as his property in every way that mattered, legal or not. 125 going once, Morton called out, his voice rising with excitement. Going twice. The saloon door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, letting in a blast of frigid air and swirling snow that momentarily blinded everyone. A tall figure stepped through, covered head to foot in ice and snow. looking more like a frozen ghost than a living man. He kicked the door shut behind him with his boot and began brushing the snow from his heavy coat, revealing dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. $500, the stranger said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a whip crack. Every head in the saloon swiveled toward him. Olivia looked up for the first time in an hour, her eyes widening in shock. $500 was more money than most men in this room would see in a year. "Now hold on," Morton sputtered, clearly thrown off his script. "Who are you? And where did you come from?" The stranger unwrapped the ice-crusted scarf from around his neck and stepped closer to the weak light of the oil lamps. He was younger than Olivia had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with the lean, muscled build of a man who spent his life working hard. His clothes, though covered in snow, were of good quality, and the gun belt around his waist held a well-maintained Colt revolver. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, the way they swept the room with a mixture of disgust and cold anger. "Name is Dalton Oliver," he said. "I was riding to Tucson when the storm hit. Took shelter in an abandoned line shack about 2 miles north of here, been there 3 days waiting it out. Decided to risk the walk into town for supplies." His gaze settled on Olivia, then moved to her bound wrists, and something hardened in his expression. "Heard the commotion from outside. Now I am making an offer. $500. Cash." He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, thick with bills. The sight of that much money caused a collective intake of breath from the crowd. Silas and Frank both looked like they had been gut-punched. "That is," Morton licked his lips nervously, "that is quite a sum. It is more than fair for a human being who should not be sold in the first place," Dalton said, his voice carrying an edge that made several men step back. "This whole proceeding is a disgrace. But if money is the only language you people speak, then I am speaking it. $500. Take it or leave it." "Now see here," Silas started to say, his face reddening with anger. Dalton turned his cold gaze on the mine foreman. "You object, you want to outbid me, then do it. Otherwise, shut your mouth." Silas looked like he wanted to reach for his gun, but something in Dalton's stance, the easy way his hand rested near his own weapon, made him reconsider. Frank was doing similar calculations, weighing his chances against this stranger who radiated a dangerous competence. $600, Frank said finally, his voice tight. Dalton did not even blink. 1,000. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Morton's eyes looked like they might pop out of his head. $1,000 was a fortune, enough to buy a small ranch or stock a store. It was an impossible sum for either Silas or Frank to match, and everyone knew it. $1,000, Morton repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "Going once, going twice." He looked desperately at Silas and Frank, but both men were silent, their faces twisted with impotent rage. "Sold to Dalton Oliver for $1,000. Dalton counted out the money with swift efficiency, his expression never changing. Morton took the bills with shaking hands, counting them twice to make sure they were real. When he was satisfied, he nodded to one of his men to release Olivia's bonds. The rope fell away from her wrists, and Olivia stumbled slightly, her legs weak from standing so long in the cold. Dalton was beside her in an instant, his hand steadying her elbow. His touch was firm but gentle, nothing like the grabbing hand she had expected. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, she could see the ice melting in his dark hair, the weathered tan of his face, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting into the sun. He smelled of leather and pine and cold winter air. "Then we are leaving," he said. He looked at Morton. Our business is concluded. Where do you think you are going? Frank demanded, stepping forward to block their path. Storm is still raging out there. You will freeze to death in 10 minutes. Dalton met his gaze steadily. That is my concern, not yours. Step aside. Maybe I do not feel like stepping aside, Frank said, his hand moving toward his knife. The sound of Dalton's Colt clearing leather was so fast that Olivia barely saw the movement. One moment his hand was at his side, the next the gun was pointed directly at Frank's chest. The rustler froze, his eyes wide. I said step aside, Dalton repeated, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. I have paid your blood money. The woman is free of any claim. Anyone who tries to stop us will answer to this. He raised the gun slightly for emphasis. The crowd parted like water. Nobody wanted to die over someone else's business, especially not when facing a man who was clearly very comfortable with his weapon. Dalton guided Olivia toward the door, his gun still drawn, his eyes watching the room. Oliver, Morton called out, what do you plan to do with her? Dalton paused at the door. That is none of your concern, but for your information, I plan to do what any decent person would do, let her make her own choices. He looked back at Olivia. Do you have any belongings you need to collect? She shook her head. Everything she owned, which was not much, had been in the boarding house where she rented a room, and Morton had seized it all to sell for the debts. She had nothing but the worn dress on her back and the thin shawl that provided almost no protection against the cold. Dalton's jaw tightened as he took in her inadequate clothing. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body heat and smelled like him. Put this on. You will freeze otherwise. But you, she started to protest. I have layers, he said shortly, and we are only going 2 miles. I have survived worse. He wrapped his scarf around her head and neck, covering everything but her eyes. Stay close to me. The wind is brutal and visibility is almost zero. Hold onto my belt and do not let go for any reason. Understand? Yes, she managed to whisper, her first word since the auction had begun. He nodded and holstered his gun, then opened the door. The wind immediately tried to rip it from his hand and snow blasted into the saloon. Olivia grabbed hold of his belt as instructed, and together they stepped out into the white hell of the storm. The cold was immediately unbearable. Even with Dalton's coat and scarf, Olivia felt like she had been plunged into ice water. The wind shrieked around them, carrying snow that stung any exposed skin like needles. She could barely see Dalton in front of her despite being close enough to touch him. The world had disappeared into a whirling white void. Dalton moved forward with steady determination, leaning into the wind. Olivia clung to his belt with both hands, forcing her legs to keep moving even though they felt like lead. She had no idea how he knew where he was going. Everything looked the same, just endless white in every direction. But he seemed to have some internal compass because he never hesitated, never paused to get his bearings. Time lost all meaning. It could have been 10 minutes or an hour. Olivia's face went numb, then her hands, then her feet. She stumbled repeatedly, but each time Dalton would pause and steady her, sometimes having to shout encouragement directly into her ear to be heard over the wind. Her lungs burned from breathing the freezing air. Her eyelashes froze together, and she had to keep blinking hard to clear them. Just when she thought she could not take another step, that she would simply collapse into the snow and let it bury her, a dark shape loomed out of the whiteness. A building. Dalton pushed open a door and practically dragged her inside, then threw his weight against the door to force it closed against the wind. The sudden absence of wind was shocking. Olivia sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor, gasping for breath. Her whole body shook with cold and exhaustion. Dalton was moving around the small space, and after a moment she heard the strike of a match, saw the flare of light as he lit an oil lamp. The warm glow pushed back the darkness, revealing a small lined shack, maybe 12 feet square, with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bunk, and a few shelves holding supplies. Dalton had the stove going within minutes, feeding it kindling and then larger pieces of wood from a stack in the corner. The fire caught and began to crackle, and gradually warmth started to spread through the tiny space. He filled a battered kettle with snow from a bucket by the door and set it on top of the stove to heat. Only then did he turn his attention back to Olivia. She was still kneeling on the floor, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. He crouched down beside her and began gently unwrapping the scarf from around her head. His hands were red with cold but steady. "We need to get you warm," he said. "Can you stand?" With his help, she got to her feet, though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. He guided her to sit on the edge of the bunk, then knelt and began unlacing her shoes. They were cheap things, more worn than not, and offered little protection. Her stockings were soaked through. "We need to get these wet things off you," he said matter-of-factly. "I have a spare shirt and some long underwear you can put on. They will be too big, but they are dry and warm." He moved to a pack in the corner and pulled out the promised clothes, then turned his back to give her privacy. "Tell me when you are decent." Olivia's fingers were so cold and numb that she could barely work the buttons of her dress, but eventually she managed to strip off the wet outer layer and the damp stockings. The dry wool shirt and long underwear Dalton had provided were indeed far too large, but they were blessedly dry and soft. She pulled the blanket from the bunk around herself. "Decent," she said quietly. He turned back around and nodded with satisfaction. He draped her wet clothes over a rope that was strung across one corner, clearly set up for this purpose. Then he poured hot water from the kettle into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink slowly," he instructed. "It will help you warm up from the inside." She wrapped her hands around the cup, grateful for the warmth, and took small sips. The water was almost too hot, but it felt wonderful going down her throat. Dalton pulled up the only chair in the shack and sat down facing her, giving her space but staying close enough to help if needed. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. This stranger had paid $1,000 for her. He had risked his life in a blizzard to bring her to safety. And now they were alone together in a tiny shack in the middle of nowhere, cut off from the world by the storm. "Thank you," Olivia said finally, her voice hoarse from cold and disuse. "You did not have to do that, any of it." Dalton's expression was grave. "Yes, I did. What was happening in that saloon was wrong. Nobody should be sold like property. I could not stand by and watch it happen." $1,000, she whispered. "That is so much money I can never repay you." "I do not want repayment," he said firmly. "I meant what I said in there. You are free. Once this storm breaks, you can go wherever you want to go, do whatever you want to do. I will give you enough money to start over, help you get to another town if that is what you want." Tears stung Olivia's eyes. Kindness was so unexpected that it almost hurt more than cruelty. "I do not understand. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Dalton was quiet for a moment, staring at the stove. When he spoke, his voice was low. 5 years ago, my sister found herself in a bad situation. Her husband died, left her with debts she could not pay. The men who came to collect those debts wanted payment in ways that had nothing to do with money. She was alone, afraid, with nowhere to turn. He paused, and Olivia could see the pain in his eyes. "I was working a ranch in Texas, did not even know what was happening until a neighbor finally tracked me down. By the time I got there, it was too late. She had taken her own life rather than face what those men planned to do to her." "Oh God," Olivia breathed. "I am so sorry." Since then, I swore that if I ever saw someone in a similar situation, I would do whatever I could to help. He looked at her directly. "You reminded me of her. Same determination in your eyes even though you were terrified. Same refusal to beg, even though you were standing on that platform being sold like livestock. My sister was strong like that too. Too strong to accept help, even when she desperately needed it. She was lucky to have a brother who cared so much," Olivia said softly. "Not lucky enough," Dalton replied bitterly. "I failed her, but I will not fail you." They fell silent again. Outside, the wind continued its relentless howl and snow pattered against the single window like thrown sand. The stove ticked and creaked as the metal expanded with heat. Olivia finished her cup of water and set it aside. "I do not even know anything about you," she said. "Where are you from? What do you do?" "I am from nowhere in particular anymore," Dalton said. "Born in Missouri, but I left home at 16 and have been moving west ever since. I have done a bit of everything. Worked ranches, rode shotgun for stage lines, spent a few years as a deputy in New Mexico. Most recently, I have been breaking horses for the Army, but that contract ended last month. I was heading to Tucson to see about ranch work when the storm hit." "And now you are stuck here because of me," Olivia said, guilt washing over her. "I was already stuck here," he corrected. "The storm did not start because you needed help. And honestly, I would rather be stuck here with someone who needs a friend than sitting alone wondering if I should have risked the walk into town." "Friend," Olivia repeated the word like it was something precious. "I have not had many of those lately." "Tell me about yourself," Dalton invited. "If you want to. No pressure." Olivia found herself talking. Maybe it was the intimacy of the small space or the warmth of the fire, or the fact that this man had already proven himself trustworthy in the most dramatic way possible. But the words came spilling out. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her real father who had died when she was 12, about her mother remarrying Walter Greene and moving west for a new start. She talked about how her mother had died of influenza 2 years ago, leaving Olivia alone with a stepfather who drank too much and gambled away every penny they had. She explained how she had worked at the general store, trying to save enough money to leave, only to have Walter die and his debts somehow become her responsibility. "Morton made up those rules," she said bitterly. "I know he did. There is no law that says a stepdaughter inherits debts like that. But there is no real law enforcement here either, not when the sheriff is Morton's cousin. So what could I do?" "You did the only thing you could," Dalton said. "You survived. That takes strength." "I do not feel strong," Olivia admitted. "I feel tired, scared, angry. When I was standing on that platform tonight, I kept thinking this cannot be real. This cannot be my life. I read books when I was a girl, you know. Romantic novels where things worked out, where good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. But real life is not like that." "Sometimes it is," Dalton said quietly. "Sometimes good things happen. You just have to hold on long enough to see them." She wanted to believe him. Looking at his honest face in the lamplight, at the steadiness in his eyes, she found that maybe she could believe him, at least a little bit. They talked through the night as the storm raged outside. Dalton shared more stories from his wandering life, tales of close calls and beautiful sunrises, of good horses and bad men, of the wild, open spaces that drew him on even when settling down would have been easier. Olivia found herself laughing at some of his stories, actually laughing, which seemed impossible given the horrors of the evening, when exhaustion finally overtook her. Dalton insisted she take the bunk while he made himself a bedroll on the floor. She protested, but he was immovable on the point. His coat served as an extra blanket, and within minutes of lying down, she was asleep, warm and safe for the first time in weeks. She woke to daylight filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. The storm still raged outside, but with less ferocity than the night before. Dalton was at the stove, heating something in a pan. He looked up when he heard her stir. "Morning," he said. "I have beans and some jerky. Not fancy, but it will fill your stomach." Olivia sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered where she was and why. The events of the previous night came flooding back, and she half expected to find it had all been a desperate dream. But no, there was Dalton, solid and real, handing her a plate of food. They ate in companionable silence. Afterward, Dalton went out briefly to gather more snow for water and to check the depth of the drifts. He came back in brushing white from his shoulders. "Still coming down, but I think it is winding down," he reported. "Might break by tonight or tomorrow morning." "And then what?" Olivia asked, voicing the question that had been circling her mind since she woke up. "That depends on you," Dalton said. He pulled the chair around and straddled it, resting his arms on the back. "You have options now. Like I said, I can give you money to start fresh somewhere else. Phoenix, maybe, or Tucson. Both are big enough that you could find work, start over where nobody knows your history." "Alone," Olivia said. "You would not be alone for long," Dalton said. "A woman like you, smart and strong, you would make friends quickly, build a new life." "And what will you do?" she asked. "Still heading to Tucson," he shrugged. "I was, but I am flexible. I go where the work is." Olivia bit her lip, considering her words carefully. "What if I do not want to go somewhere alone? What if I wanted to travel with someone for a while, just until I get my bearings?" Dalton's expression became cautious. "You do not owe me anything, Olivia. I want to be very clear about that. What I did last night, I did because it was the right thing to do, not because I expect anything in return." "I know that," she said quickly. "That is not what I mean. I just thought that maybe we could help each other. You said you are looking for ranch work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend a garden. If you found a position on a ranch, maybe they would need a housekeeper or cook too. We could travel together platonically," she added firmly, "and both benefit." He studied her for a long moment. "You are sure? I will not lie to you, traveling with a single man might cause talk, might damage your reputation." Olivia laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "My reputation? After last night, do you really think I have a reputation left to damage in Gila Bend? Besides, I do not plan to ever come back here. Let them talk." "Fair point," Dalton conceded. "All right then. If you are sure, I would be glad for the company. And you are right. A lot of ranches do need cooks and such. We could present ourselves as siblings if that would make it easier." "Or cousins," Olivia suggested. "We do not look much alike for siblings." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Cousins it is then." They shook hands on it, and Olivia felt something settle in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just relief that she would not have to face the world alone. The storm did break that evening, the wind dying down to nothing, and the snow stopping as suddenly as if someone had closed a door. The world outside was transformed into an alien landscape of white drifts and ice-covered trees. The sky cleared to reveal a vast expanse of stars, more than Olivia had ever seen, cold and brilliant and indifferent to the human struggles below. Dalton said they should wait until morning to make any decisions about moving. The temperature had dropped with the clearing of the clouds, and traveling at night in these conditions was asking for trouble. So they spent another night in the line shack, and this time their conversation was less about the past and more about the future. "I heard there is good ranch country north of here," Dalton said, studying a worn map by lamplight. "Up toward Prescott. Big cattle operations, some horse ranches too. The weather is better than down here. Higher elevation means cooler summers. That might be a good place to start looking." "How far is that?" Olivia asked, peering at the map over his shoulder. "A week's travel in good weather, maybe more given the snow. We would need to get supplies in Gila Bend first." Olivia's face must have shown her distress at the thought of going back to that town, because Dalton quickly added, "Or we could skirt around it, head east to Maricopa Wells first. It is a longer route, but we could outfit there and then head north." "I would prefer that," Olivia said quietly. "I have no desire to see any of those men again." "Then we go the long way," Dalton agreed without hesitation. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. They packed up the line shack carefully, Dalton leaving a note and some money for the owner to compensate for the supplies they had used. Olivia's dress had dried overnight, and though she hated putting it back on, it was necessary. She kept Dalton's spare shirt underneath for extra warmth, and he fashioned a better scarf for her from a piece of canvas. The walk back toward civilization was hard going. The snow was deep in places, sometimes up to their knees, and the sun reflecting off the white landscape was blinding. But the sky was clear, and Dalton knew how to navigate by the sun and landmarks. They moved slowly but steadily east, away from Gila Bend. It took them 2 days to reach Maricopa Wells, a small settlement situated where several stage routes intersected. They were both exhausted by the time they arrived, faces wind-burned and feet aching, but the town represented hope. A fresh start. Dalton used some of his remaining funds to secure them a room at a boarding house. Actually, 2 rooms, side by side. And the proprietor accepted their story of being cousins traveling together without question. After the deprivations of the line shack and the harsh trail, the simple rooms with their clean beds and warm quilts felt like pure luxury. Olivia slept for 12 hours straight and woke feeling more rested than she had in months. Dalton had already been up and about. He informed her over breakfast at a small cafe and had learned of several possible opportunities. There was a large horse ranch about 30 miles north that was hiring, and another cattle operation northwest of there that was known to treat its workers fairly. "I thought we could rest here for a few days," he said, "get proper supplies, maybe a horse or 2 if we can afford it, then head north and see what we can find." "That sounds good," Olivia agreed. "I should see if there is any work I can do here while we rest, earn a bit of money." She found employment easily enough at the local laundry, and though the work was hot and hard, she was grateful for it. The woman who ran the laundry, a widow named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had been a railroad worker, was kind and asked no questions about Olivia's past. For 3 days, Olivia washed and pressed clothes, and every evening she returned to the boarding house to find Dalton had been equally productive. He had picked up work mucking stables and repairing tack, and had used his wages plus a bit of his savings to purchase a sturdy mare and a pack mule. The mare was called Juniper, a bay with kind eyes and a calm temperament, and Dalton declared she would be Olivia's mount. He had also bought a gelding for himself, a rangy sorrel called Red who had seen better days but was still sound. On their 4th evening in Maricopa Wells, they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sun set and discussing their plans. Olivia had earned enough at the laundry to buy herself some proper traveling clothes, including a split skirt that would allow her to ride comfortably, a warm coat, and sturdy boots. She felt more prepared to face whatever came next. "We could leave tomorrow," Dalton said. "Weather should hold for a few more days at least." "I am ready," Olivia said. She was surprised to find it was true. The terror and helplessness she had felt in Gila Bend had faded, replaced by something she could not quite name. Not happiness, not yet, but a cautious optimism. Possibility. Olivia, Dalton said, his tone suddenly serious. I want to make sure we are clear on something. When we get to wherever we are going, if you decide you do not want to stay, if you want to move on alone, that is fine. You are not obligated to me in any way. I meant what I said about you being free. She turned to look at him, really look at him. Over the past week, she had come to know this man as someone decent and honorable, someone who kept his word and did not expect anything he had not earned. But more than that, she had come to enjoy his company. The easy way they talked, the comfortable silences, the sense that she did not have to pretend to be anything other than what she was. I know I am not obligated, she said carefully. But I would like to stay traveling together if you do not mind. I feel safer with you. And I think we make a good team. Something in Dalton's expression softened. I think so too. I just wanted to make sure you knew you had a choice. I do, Olivia said, and I am choosing this. They set out the next morning under a sky that promised clear weather. The ride north was long but not unpleasant. The landscape gradually shifted from the flat desert around Maricopa Wells to more varied terrain as they gained elevation. They passed through stands of saguaro cacti standing like sentinels, traversed rocky washes and rolling hills covered in scrub brush, and climbed into areas where juniper and pinyon pines began to appear. Dalton was an easy traveling companion. He was competent with camp chores, sharing the work equally without being asked. He was a good cook, despite their limited supplies, and he knew how to find water and choose safe campsites. Most importantly, he was patient and considerate, never pushing too hard, always checking to make sure Olivia was comfortable. For her part, Olivia did her best to contribute equally. She was not as experienced with outdoor living as Dalton, but she learned quickly. She tended the horses, prepared meals, kept their gear organized and their clothes mended. And slowly, day by day, mile by mile, she felt herself healing from the trauma of what had happened in Gila Bend. They talked while they rode, sharing stories and dreams. Dalton spoke of his hope to one day have a small place of his own, maybe a horse ranch where he could breed and train quality animals. Olivia talked about wanting stability, a place where she belonged, where she could put down roots without fear of them being ripped up again. On their fifth night on the trail, they camped beside a small creek in a grove of cottonwoods. The evening was mild, with just a hint of spring warmth in the air, even though it was still February. They sat by the fire after supper, Dalton whittling a piece of wood into the rough shape of a horse while Olivia mended a tear in one of the saddlebags. "Can I ask you something?" Olivia said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Of course." "That night in Gila Bend, when you came into the saloon, you said you had been in the line shack for 3 days. Were you really planning to walk into town for supplies, or did you hear what was happening and come to stop it?" Dalton's knife paused in its work. "Honest answer, always." "I was not planning to go into town. I had enough supplies to wait out the storm. But on that third day the wind shifted and I could hear sounds carrying from Gila Bend. Voices, shouting. I could not make out words, but something about it did not sit right. So I bundled up and made the walk to see what was happening." He looked at her over the fire. "When I got close enough to hear what was going on, that they were auctioning off a woman, I knew I had to do something. But I will be honest, I had not planned what I would do until I opened that door and saw you standing there." "And you decided to spend $1,000, Olivia said wonderingly, "just like that." "I would have spent more if I had to," Dalton said simply. "It was wrong. Sometimes you do not get to carefully plan out the right thing to do. Sometimes you just have to act and trust yourself to figure out the details later. That money, though, it must have been most of your savings." "It was," he admitted, "but money can be earned again. I am young, healthy, capable. I will make it back. But if I had walked away and done nothing, I would have had to live with that for the rest of my life. That would have been a price I could not afford to pay. Olivia felt her throat tighten with emotion. You are a good man, Dalton Oliver. He ducked his head, looking embarrassed. I am just a man, trying to do right when I can. They reached the first ranch on Dalton's list after 7 days of travel. It was a horse operation called the Diamond Cross, situated in a beautiful valley with good grass and plenty of water. The owner, a leathery man in his 50s named Thomas Granger, looked them over with shrewd eyes when they rode up to the main house. Dalton explained they were cousins looking for work, that he had experience breaking and training horses, and that Olivia was an excellent cook and housekeeper. Granger listened, asked some pointed questions about Dalton's experience, and then offered him a position at $30 a month plus room and board. As for you, miss, he said to Olivia, I do not really need a cook. My wife handles that. But we could use help with the garden come spring, and someone to help with laundry and such. I could offer $15 a month and a room in the main house where my wife can keep an eye on things proper-like. It was a reasonable offer, and they were about to accept when the wife in question came out of the house. She was a thin, pinch-faced woman who looked Olivia up and down with open suspicion. She is awful young and pretty to be traveling with a man, cousin or not, Mrs. Granger said coldly. I am not sure I want that kind of influence around my sons. The insult was clear. Olivia felt her face burn with humiliation, but before she could respond, Dalton spoke up. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Granger, but I think we will look elsewhere. Come on, Olivia. They rode away from the Diamond Cross without looking back, and Olivia did not trust herself to speak until they were well out of sight. When the anger and hurt finally burst out of her, Dalton brought their horses to a stop and let her vent. How dare she? Olivia said furiously. She does not know anything about me, about what I have been through. Who is she to judge? She is a small-minded person with a narrow view of the world, Dalton said calmly, and we are better off not working for people like that. Trust me. But we need work, Olivia said, her anger fading into worry. What if everyone reacts like that? They will not, Dalton assured her. There are good people out here too, we just have to find them. He was right. 3 days later, they arrived at a cattle ranch called the Lazy J, owned by a man named Jacob Sterling. Sterling was younger than Granger, maybe 40, with an open, friendly face and a firm handshake. His wife had died 2 years prior, and he was struggling to manage the ranch while also caring for his young daughter. When Dalton explained their situation, Sterling's face lit up with relief. A cook, someone who can help with household matters, that is exactly what I need. Dalton, if you are half as good with horses as you say, I can use you too. We run mostly cattle here, but we keep about 30 horses for the ranch work, and they need proper training and care. He offered Dalton $35 a month and Olivia $20, both with room and board. The wages were fair, and more importantly, Sterling seemed like a decent man. They accepted. The Lazy J became home in a way Olivia had not expected. The ranch house was a sprawling adobe structure that had been built with care and maintained well despite the absence of a woman's touch for 2 years. Sterling's daughter Emma was 8 years old, a serious child who had taken her mother's death hard and thrown herself into helping her father run the ranch. Olivia found herself falling naturally into the role of housekeeper and cook. She cleaned the long, neglected rooms, planted a kitchen garden, and prepared meals that brought groans of appreciation from the ranch hands. Emma was initially standoffish, but Olivia won her over with patience and genuine kindness, not trying to replace her mother but offering friendship and support. Dalton thrived as well. He proved to be everything he had claimed and more when it came to horses. Within 2 weeks, he had assessed every animal on the ranch, identified which ones needed additional training, and begun a systematic program to improve the whole string. Sterling was impressed and gave Dalton increasing responsibility. The weeks turned into months. Spring came to the Arizona high country, bringing wildflowers and new calves, longer days and evening thunderstorms that rattled across the sky like drums. Olivia found herself settling into a rhythm, a life that felt stable and good. She made friends among the ranch hands and their families, went to church socials in the nearest town, felt herself becoming part of a community, and through it all, her friendship with Dalton deepened. They still took meals together when work allowed, still talked in the evenings about everything and nothing. But something was shifting, had been shifting for a while if Olivia was honest with herself. The way her heart lifted when she saw him ride in from the range. The way his smile made her feel warm inside. The way she found herself noticing small things about him, the capable strength of his hands, the way the sun brought out hints of gold in his dark hair, the sound of his laugh. She told herself she was being foolish. Dalton had saved her life and given her freedom, but that did not mean he thought of her as anything more than a friend, a responsibility he had taken on out of honor. He had never said or done anything improper, never crossed the line of their platonic arrangement. But sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and wondering in his eyes. And sometimes when they worked together, their hands would brush accidentally, and she would feel a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with friendship. It was Emma who finally forced the issue, in the innocent way that children do. It was a Sunday afternoon in early May, and Olivia was sitting on the porch mending clothes while Emma played with a rag doll nearby. Dalton had just ridden up from checking fences, and Emma ran to greet him, chattering about her day. "And Olivia taught me how to make biscuits, and they only burned a little bit, and we picked the first lettuce from the garden," Emma reported breathlessly. Then, without any warning, she asked, "Dalton, when are you and Olivia going to get married?" Olivia's needle stabbed into her thumb. Dalton, who had been unsaddling red, went completely still. "Emma, honey, we have talked about this," Jacob Sterling said, appearing from the barn with exasperation on his face. "You cannot just ask people things like that." "But why not?" Emma asked, confused. "They like each other, I can tell. And Olivia would be so pretty in a wedding dress, and we could have a party." "That is not how it works," Sterling said, shooting an apologetic look at Olivia and Dalton. "Sometimes people are just friends." "But they look at each other the same way you used to look at Mama," Emma insisted with the brutal honesty of childhood. There was a moment of profound silence. Olivia could feel her face burning. She did not dare look at Dalton. Sterling cleared his throat. "Emma, come help me with something in the barn. Now." He herded his protesting daughter away, leaving Olivia and Dalton alone on the porch. Olivia forced herself to continue sewing, even though her hands were shaking. "I am sorry about that. Emma is just a child. She does not understand." "Does not understand what?" Dalton asked quietly. He had abandoned Red's saddle and come to stand at the base of the porch steps. "That things are complicated, that you and we have an arrangement, an agreement. We are friends, traveling companions." "Is that all we are?" Dalton asked. Something in his voice made Olivia finally look up at him. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I do not know," she whispered. "What else could we be?" Dalton climbed the steps slowly and sat down beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "For the past 3 months, I have been telling myself that I needed to keep things professional between us." that you had been through trauma, that the last thing you needed was more complications, that I had no right to develop feelings for you after everything that happened. Dalton, Olivia breathed, her heart hammering in her chest. But the thing is, he continued, I have developed feelings. Strong ones. You are the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind when I go to sleep. When I am out on the range, I find myself looking forward to coming back just so I can see you. When you laugh at something I say, it feels like the sun coming out. And I have been trying to hide it because I did not want to make you uncomfortable, did not want you to feel obligated or pressured. But now, Emma has gone and said it out loud, and maybe that is for the best, because I am tired of pretending. Olivia set down her mending with trembling hands. You have feelings for me? Yes, he said simply. I am in love with you, Olivia. I think I have been falling for you since that first night in the line shack when you laughed at one of my stories despite everything you had been through. You are brave and kind and strong, and you make me want to be a better man. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know you probably do not feel the same way, but I needed you to know the truth. No right, Olivia repeated, and then she did something that surprised both of them. She laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. Dalton Oliver, you saved my life. You gave me back my freedom when I thought it was lost forever. You have been patient and kind and wonderful, and I have been falling in love with you too, but I was afraid to admit it. Afraid that you only saw me as someone you had to protect, a duty you had taken on. Never a duty, Dalton said firmly. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Olivia, you have never been a burden or an obligation to me. You are a gift. The best thing that has ever happened to me, even though the circumstances that brought us together were terrible. They sat there holding hands, grinning at each other like fools until Sterling's voice called from the barn. Is it safe to come out, or should Emma and I give you 2 more time? You can come out, Dalton called back, not taking his eyes off Olivia. I think we have some news. Emma came running, her face alight with excitement. Are you getting married? We have not quite gotten that far yet, Dalton said, but he was smiling. How about we start with courting properly? That sounds perfect, Olivia agreed. Their courtship was the talk of the ranch. Everyone had apparently noticed the connection between them long before they had acknowledged it themselves, and there was a general sense of satisfaction that things had finally been settled. Jacob Sterling gave his blessing enthusiastically, and the ranch hands treated Dalton with a mixture of congratulations and good-natured ribbing. Dalton courted Olivia with the same steady determination he brought to everything else. He brought her wildflowers from the range, taught her to ride better, carved her a small wooden horse that she treasured. They took long walks in the evening after chores were done, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. He was always respectful, always mindful of her past trauma, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. For Olivia, it was a revelation to be courted by a good man. To feel cherished rather than controlled, desired rather than possessed. Her feelings for Dalton grew deeper with each passing day, from affection to love to something that felt as essential as breathing. In late June, on a warm evening when the sky was painted orange and pink with sunset, Dalton asked her to marry him. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the ranch property, and he pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It was my grandmother's, he said. The only thing I have from my family. I want you to have it if you will accept me. I know I do not have much to offer you right now. I am just a ranch hand with a decent horse and some dreams. But I promise you that I will work hard every day to build us a good life. I will be faithful and true, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. Olivia Greene, will you marry me? Yes, Olivia said through happy tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in early August in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The local circuit preacher performed the service, and it seemed like half the county turned out to celebrate. Jacob Sterling stood up as Dalton's best man, and Emma served as Olivia's flower girl, taking her duties very seriously. Olivia wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Dalton wore his best clothes with his hair neatly trimmed and his boots polished to a shine. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Dalton kissed her for the first time, Olivia felt like her heart might burst from happiness. This man who had rescued her from the worst moment of her life, who had given her back her freedom and then won her heart, was now her husband. It seemed too good to be true, like a dream she might wake up from at any moment, but it was real. The wedding party and dance that followed were real, full of laughter and music and celebration. The little cabin that Jacob Sterling had given them to live in, one of the line shacks that had been fixed up and made comfortable, was real. And that night, when they were finally alone as husband and wife, the tenderness and passion they shared was the most real thing of all. Dalton was patient and gentle, mindful of her past fears, making sure every step was something she wanted. And Olivia discovered that intimacy with someone you loved and trusted was nothing like the horror she had feared. It was beautiful and connecting and right in ways that made her understand what all the romance novels had been talking about. Afterward, lying in Dalton's arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Olivia felt a peace she had never known. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Dalton murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "For everything. For saving me, for loving me, for being the best man I have ever known." "You saved me too," he said softly. "I was just drifting before I met you, moving from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to stop drifting, a reason to build something lasting. You made me want to be the man you see when you look at me." "I love you," Olivia said, and the words felt like magic. "I love you too," Dalton replied. "Always." Life as a married couple settled into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard during the day, Dalton with the horses and cattle, Olivia managing the household and helping Jacob Sterling with Emma. In the evenings, they retreated to their little cabin, creating a world that was entirely their own. They talked and laughed, made plans for the future, and slowly built a life together that felt solid and true. Autumn came, painting the high country in shades of gold and red. Dalton had proven himself so valuable to the Lazy J that Jacob Sterling offered him a partnership stake in the ranch, a small percentage that would grow over time. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to be more than just a hired hand. Dalton accepted gratefully, and he and Olivia celebrated the news with quiet joy. Winter returned, but this time it held no terror for Olivia. She was safe and warm in her home with her husband, surrounded by friends and community. When the first snow fell in December, she stood at the window of their cabin watching the flakes drift down, and Dalton came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "A year ago, I was standing in a blizzard," she said quietly, "terrified and alone, being sold like livestock. I thought my life was over. And now," Dalton asked, resting his chin on the top of her head, "now I have everything. A home, a husband I love, a future I can look forward to. It is like I died that night and was born again into a completely different life." "You did not die," Dalton said. "You survived, and you did not just survive, you thrived. You took the second chance you were given and built something beautiful with it. I am just lucky I got to be part of your story." "Our story," Olivia corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "Not mine or yours, but ours. Together." "Together," Dalton agreed, and kissed her with a sweetness that still made her knees weak. That winter was mild compared to the previous year's blizzard, for which everyone was grateful. Life on the Lazy J continued its steady pace. Calves were born in the spring, the garden flourished under Olivia's care, and the horse string improved dramatically under Dalton's training. In April, Olivia began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Dalton, choosing an evening when they were alone in their cabin. She had prepared his favorite meal, and after they had eaten, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat belly. "There is someone I would like you to meet," she said, watching his face. Understanding dawned slowly, followed by wonder, followed by the biggest smile she had ever seen. "Really? We are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," Olivia confirmed, and then found herself swept up in his arms and spun around the cabin while he laughed with pure joy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Olivia was occasionally tired and queasy in the early months, but overall she felt healthy and strong. Dalton became even more attentive than usual, constantly worrying that she was working too hard or lifting too much. It was sweet, if occasionally a bit overwhelming. Jacob Sterling was thrilled at the news, as was Emma, who immediately started planning all the ways she would help with the baby. The ranch community rallied around them, with gifts of baby clothes and furniture, advice both helpful and otherwise, and a general sense of celebration. In November, just over 2 years after that terrible night in Gila Bend, Olivia went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, but with Dalton holding her hand and the skilled assistance of the local midwife, she delivered a healthy baby boy in the early hours of the morning. When the midwife placed the baby in her arms, Olivia looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. This little person, this miracle, was hers and Dalton's. A new life born from their love, untainted by the darkness of the past. "He is beautiful," Dalton whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Olivia said, tracing the tiny feature with her finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not been able to settle on one. Now, holding their son, Dalton said, "What about Nathan? It means gift from God, because that is what he is, what you both are. God's gifts to me." "Nathan Oliver," Olivia said, testing the name. "I love it." Little Nathan proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong. Dalton was a natural father, patient and loving, happy to walk the floor with his son in the middle of the night or change messy diapers. Watching him with their child, Olivia fell in love with him all over again. The years that followed were good ones. The Lazy J prospered, and Dalton's partnership stake grew. By the time Nathan was 3 years old, Dalton and Olivia were able to buy a piece of land adjacent to the main ranch, 50 acres with a good stream running through it. They built a house there, nothing fancy but solid and comfortable, with room to grow. Dalton started his own horse breeding operation on the side, specializing in horses for ranch work. His reputation for quality animals spread, and soon he was getting orders from all over the territory. Olivia managed their household and helped with the horse business, keeping the books and handling correspondence with buyers. When Nathan was 4, they had a second child, a daughter they named Grace. She had Dalton's dark hair and Olivia's green eyes, and from birth she was a force of nature, bold and curious about everything. 2 years after Grace came another boy whom they named Samuel. He was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and gentle, always observing the world with serious eyes. Life was full and busy and wonderful. There were hard times, of course, droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that scared them, the normal struggles of building a life and raising a family. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Jacob Sterling became like a father to both of them, and Emma grew into a capable young woman who eventually married one of the ranch hands and settled nearby. The community around them was strong, full of good people who looked out for each other. As the years passed and their children grew, Olivia sometimes thought back to that terrible night in Gila Bend. It felt like something that had happened to a different person, in a different life. She had been so young and scared and desperate then. Now she was a wife, a mother, a respected member of her community. She had built a life that was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. One winter evening when Nathan was 10, Grace was 6, and Samuel was 4, the whole family was gathered in the living room of their home. A fire crackled in the hearth, and snow fell gently outside the windows. Dalton was showing Nathan how to carve wood, their heads bent close together in concentration. Grace was reading aloud to Samuel from a picture book, her voice dramatic as she acted out all the parts. Olivia sat in her rocking chair, working on some mending, and paused to take in the scene. This was happiness. This was home. These people, this life, this love that surrounded her. Dalton looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, that warm, wonderful smile that still made her heart skip, and mouthed, "I love you." She mouthed it back, and for a moment they just looked at each other, communicating without words all the gratitude and affection and commitment that had only grown stronger over the years. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and she and Dalton were lying together in the darkness of their room, Olivia said, "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" "In that saloon in Gila Bend, $500, Dalton recalled, "though I ended up going higher. You said it like it meant nothing, like I was worth any price. You were, you are." He pulled her closer. "Best $1,000 I ever spent." Olivia smiled against his shoulder. "Sometimes I try to imagine what would have happened if you had not walked through that door. Where I would be now, if I would even be alive." "You do not have to imagine that," Dalton said firmly. "It did not happen. I did walk through that door, and everything that came after, this life we built, that is what matters. I know, but I still marvel at it sometimes. How one moment, one decision can change everything. If the storm had not hit, if you had not been in that lined shack, if you had not decided to walk into town that night, everything would be different." "Maybe," Dalton said. "Or maybe we were always meant to find each other. I like to think that even if it had not been that night in that place, we still would have met somehow. Call it fate or destiny or just good luck. But I believe you and I were meant to be together." "I believe that too," Olivia whispered. She thought of all the roads that had led her to that moment. The losses and heartbreaks, the fear and uncertainty. All of it had been necessary to bring her to this place, to this man, to this life. She would not change a single step of the journey because every step had led her home. The years continued their steady march. Nathan grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses. By the time he was 16, he was working alongside Dalton, learning the family business from the ground up. Grace proved to be a gifted artist, filling sketchbooks with drawings of the ranch and the landscape. Samuel developed a love of books and learning that reminded Olivia of herself at that age. Dalton's horse operation became one of the most successful in the territory. His animals were known for their intelligence, soundness, and reliability, and he could barely keep up with demand. He hired help, training young men in his methods, but he never let the business grow so large that he lost the personal touch that made it special. Olivia continued to manage the household and the business side of things, but she also found time to give back to the community. She helped start a school in the area, worked with the church to provide aid to families in need, and became known as someone who could be counted on when times were hard. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure that no one in her community would ever face those circumstances if she could help it. When Jacob Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, it was Dalton and Olivia who organized the funeral and helped Emma settle the estate. The Lazy J was sold to a large cattle company, but Dalton and Olivia's own ranch was thriving, and they were able to buy additional land, expanding their operation. Grandchildren came, first from Nathan, who married a school teacher from Prescott, then from Grace, who wed a fellow artist she met in Tucson. Samuel went to college, one of the first in the family to do so, studying law with the intention of making sure that what had happened to his mother could never happen to anyone else. On Olivia's 45th birthday, Dalton surprised her with a trip. He had arranged for the children and grandchildren to handle the ranch for a week, and he took her on a journey south. At first, Olivia thought they were simply traveling for pleasure, seeing new sights, but on the third day she recognized the landscape. They were approaching Gila Bend. "Dalton, why are we here?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Because I wanted you to see it," he said. "The place where we met, the place where our story really began." They rode into Gila Bend in the late afternoon. The town had changed some in the intervening years. New buildings had gone up, old ones had come down. But the saloon where the auction had taken place was still standing, though it was now a mercantile. Dalton tied up their horses and took Olivia's hand. They walked through the town together, and Olivia was surprised to find that she felt no fear, no trauma. That part of her life was so long ago, so completely disconnected from who she was now, that this place held no power over her. "How do you feel?" Dalton asked. "I feel nothing," Olivia said, and realized it was true. "It is just a town, it could be anywhere. The person who was here that night, she is gone. I am someone completely different now." "You were always strong," Dalton said, "even then. But yes, you have changed, we both have. We were two lost people who found each other at exactly the right moment. And look what we built from that moment." They stayed in Gila Bend just long enough to have a meal and water the horses, then rode out as the sun was setting. Neither of them looked back. There was nothing in that town they needed anymore. Their life was ahead of them, not behind. The ride home took 3 days, and they took their time, enjoying the journey and each other's company. At night, they camped under the stars, lying together in their bedrolls and talking the way they had when they were young and just starting out. So much had changed, yet the core of what they had remained the same. The love, the trust, the partnership that had defined them from the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Olivia asked on their last night on the trail. "Spending that money, tying yourself to me when you could have kept moving, stayed free." Dalton propped himself up on his elbow to look at her. "Not for one single second. Marrying you, building this life with you, raising our children, it is the best thing I have ever done. The only thing I have ever done that really mattered. You did not tie me down, Olivia. You set me free. Free to be the man I always wanted to be, free to have the life I always dreamed of but never thought I would find. I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Dalton replied. "You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed beneath the stars, two people who had been through fire and come out stronger, who had taken the worst circumstances and built something beautiful. Their story could have ended in that saloon in Gila Bend, but instead it had just been beginning. And what a story it had become. When they arrived home, they were greeted with joy and celebration. The house was full of family, the ranch was thriving, and everything they had built together spread out before them like a promise kept. This was the life they had earned through hard work and love and dedication to each other. The years that followed brought the normal joys and sorrows of life. Losses and gains, triumphs and setbacks. But through it all, Dalton and Olivia remained each other's anchor and support. They grew old together with grace, their love deepening and maturing like fine wine. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony on their land. Olivia was 62 now, her hair more silver than brown, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Dalton was 67, still strong despite the years, still looking at her with the same love and wonder he had shown from the beginning. 40 years ago, Dalton said, holding her hands in his, I walked through a door in a snowstorm and found the other half of my soul. You have given me the best years of my life. You have been my partner in everything, my greatest supporter, my truest friend. I am the man I am today because you believed in me. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Olivia had to wipe away tears before she could speak. 40 years ago, I was saved by a man who asked nothing in return except that I be free to choose my own path. I chose you, Dalton. Every day since then I have chosen you, and every day you have proven that choice to be the best one I ever made. You have given me a home, a family, a life beyond anything I could have imagined in my darkest moments. You taught me what love truly means. Not control or possession, but partnership and respect and unwavering support. I am who I am today because you saw me, really saw me, and loved what you saw. I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond. They kissed to the sound of applause and cheers from their family, and the celebration that followed was filled with laughter and stories, with good food and good company. It was a perfect day, a perfect life. As evening fell and the party began to wind down, Dalton and Olivia slipped away to their favorite spot, a bench beneath an old cottonwood tree that overlooked the ranch. They sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Dalton's arm around Olivia's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked. "Everything," Olivia said. "All of it. The journey from there to here, the life we built. The family we raised, how impossibly lucky I am. We are," Dalton corrected. "How impossibly lucky we are." "Do you think it is almost over?" Olivia asked quietly. "Our time, I do not know," Dalton said honestly. "But I know that whenever it comes, I want to face it the way we have faced everything else, together. And I know that we have lived a good life, a meaningful life. We have loved well and been loved in return. Not everyone can say that." "No," Olivia agreed. "Not everyone can say that." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the voices of their family, the laughter of their grandchildren, the continuation of the legacy they had built. "I used to be so afraid," Olivia said suddenly. "Before I met you, I was afraid all the time. Afraid of being alone, afraid of being hurt, afraid that my life would never amount to anything. But you chased away all those fears. You showed me that I was stronger than I knew, that I deserved to be loved, that my life could be full and rich and meaningful." "You did all that yourself," Dalton said. "I just had the privilege of being there to witness it." "We did it together," Olivia insisted. "Everything good in my life I have because of you." "And everything good in mine I have because of you," Dalton countered. "I think that is how the best partnerships work, each person making the other better, stronger, more complete. As full darkness fell and the stars wheeled overhead, they remained on their bench, two people who had walked through fire and come out holding hands. Their story had started in darkness and cold, in fear and desperation. But it had become something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through the generations they had brought into the world. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for. To love and be loved. To build something meaningful. To leave the world a little better than they found it. Dalton and Olivia had done all that and more. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was real, with all the complications and challenges that real life brings. But it was also a testament to the power of love, the strength of partnership, and the possibility of redemption and new beginnings. Two broken people who found each other at the exact moment they needed each other most, and built a life that neither could have created alone. As they finally rose from their bench and walked back toward the house, toward the warm light and the voices of their family, Olivia took one last look at the stars above. She thought of that girl standing on an auction platform in a snowstorm, terrified and alone. She sent a thought across the years to that girl: hold on, just hold on. Help is coming. Your life is about to begin. And then she took her husband's hand and went home,